This year, actually a week from today, marks the 100th anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisk, widely considered one of the most influential and innovative figures in the traditional study of rabbinic texts. Parenthetically, this conference thereby marks 2 centenaries and not just one. The question accordingly arises, what is unique about his approach to the analysis and interpretation of Halakhic texts? In this lecture, I would like to briefly consider one interesting phenomenon found in his writings, which, to the best of my knowledge, is not attested previously in Halakhic literature, and which may help to shed some light on the uniqueness of Reb Chaim as a Halakhic thinker. The investigation of hypothetical cases plays an important role in legal analysis in both the ancient and modern worlds, both secular and Jewish. Some of the hypothetical cases discussed by the Talmudic rabbis seem fairly plausible, while others seem rather far-fetched. For example, the case discussed in number 1 on the handout, I'm not going to read it, where one rabbi asks another, what happens if a boy is born with 2 heads? On which head must the boy put on tefillin when he grows up, etc. Yet, while cases of this sort are far-fetched, they are not intrinsically impossible, as they do not controvert logic or propositions which are conceptually or metaphysically necessary, as would be the case, for example, if we were discussing not Siamese twins, but square circles, dots which are simultaneously black and white, and so on and so forth. It wasn't meant as a sense of humorous question. In the end, as the Talmud relates later, shortly after the discussion, a young boy like this entered the Beit Midrash, and the question arose what to do with him. And this case, incidentally, just parenthetically, there were scholars who claimed that this is completely ridiculous. Lieberman cited a parallel from Pliny the Elder, if I'm not mistaken, indicating that even in the ancient world, bicephalic infants were a known phenomenon. In any case, to Reb Chaim, he often analyzes hypothetical cases, frequently using a special term to introduce them, im ach, if only. Parenthetically, let me note that the familiar rabbinic expression, lu yitzuyar, if it could be conceived or imagined, which is often used by earlier scholars to introduce halachic hypotheticals, this term is never used in the actual authentic writings of Reb Chaim insofar as I am aware. The character of the hypotheticals that Reb Chaim considers varies. Some are empirically unlikely, like the case of the Siamese twins mentioned earlier, whereas others are intrinsically impossible, and it is hypotheticals of this latter sort that I wish to discuss in this lecture. The use of impossible hypotheticals, or as they're called in modern literature, philosophical, metaphysical literature, counter-possibles or counter-possible conditionals, raises a number of questions. Among them, what prompted the use of such statements? Likewise, how is it possible to reason coherently about matters of this sort, attempting to discuss impossible situations or non-existent objects? Here, I briefly consider 2 types of counter-possibles found in the writings of Reb Chaim, followed by a few comments on the broader implications of this phenomenon. I proceed then with our first example, passage 2 on the handout, Bavli Nidarim 69a, which serves as the backdrop for Reb Chaim's discussion. The Talmud states, Rabbah asked, what if someone said to his wife or daughter, your vow is confirmed and nullified simultaneously? 2 conflicting propositions. Here, the husband's confirmation and nullification of the vow are mutually exclusive. So how should we treat what he said? The Talmud answers by citing another dictum of Rabbah, whatever is not valid consecutively is not valid even simultaneously. This latter statement, in its original context, apparently refers to someone who attempted to betroth two sisters simultaneously. And since it is impossible to betroth two sisters consecutively, for once the first sister has been betrothed, the second sister is forbidden to the husband, it is equally impossible to betroth two sisters simultaneously. And hence the same should apply, mutatis mutandis, to someone who attempted to simultaneously confirm and nullify a vow. Since nullification is not possible after confirmation and vice versa, the husband's statement should be treated as null and void, leaving the vow neither confirmed nor nullified. However, Maimonides in number 3 on the handout rules that the vow is confirmed, in ostensive contradiction to the plain sense of the Talmud. To resolve this difficulty, Reb Chaim, number 4 in the handout, argues that there is a fundamental difference between nullification and confirmation of vows, and hence between this case and that of the betrothal of two sisters. Reb Chaim claims that it is halakhically impossible to nullify a vow after it had been confirmed. Hence, confirmation of a vow legally precludes nullification, since confirmation by definition renders nullification subsequently impossible. By contrast, nullification does not legally preclude subsequent confirmation, as the conflict between these two is not legal but practical. Once a vow has been nullified, there is no vow left to confirm. Hence, nullification does not legally preclude confirmation, and therefore we cannot invoke Rabbah's dictum in the end of number 2 to invalidate the husband's statement in its entirety. This leaves us with the husband's initial confirmation of the vow, just as Maimonides had ruled. Now, in drawing this distinction, Reb Chaim resorts to a counterpossible, and I quote in translation, those who prefer can follow in the Hebrew. Nullification eliminates the vow, so of necessity, nothing is left to confirm. But if we could find a case, im ach matzinu, where a vow could exist after nullification, then confirmation would be fully effective. Clearly, the option of a vow existing after it had been nullified is a rank impossibility, since the essence of vow nullification lies in the fact that the vow no longer exists. And as such, this is a clear example of a counterpossible. How and why does Reb Chaim use this counterpossible? In fact, his basic distinction between legal contradiction, as when confirmation precedes nullification, and practical contradiction, as when nullification precedes confirmation, this is a perfectly logical and straightforward distinction. And let me note parenthetically that such a distinction was already offered in a very similar context hundreds of years prior to Reb Chaim by Tosafot. Why he doesn't cite them is another question. I won't go into this. And indeed, this distinction could readily have been proposed without invoking the counterpossible. Thus, the counterpossible here seems to perform a rhetorical and didactic function to help sharpen what is ultimately a halakhically plausible distinction. Such a counterpossible, then, lacks any intrinsic metaphysical or halakhic significance, and it reflects more on how Reb Chaim formulates his argumentation than on the character of his legal analysis per se. I now proceed to the second example. Maimonides rules in number 5 on the handout, second tithe cannot be brought from outside the land of Israel like a firstborn animal. Therefore, the rabbis did not obligate separating second tithe in Syria, and this is the case even though other land-dependent commandments do apply in Syria by rabbinic decree. Maimonides' ruling here is problematic. First, he seems to infer the law of second tithe from that of firstborn animals. Second tithe cannot be brought, just like a firstborn animal. However, the inference should presumably run in the opposite direction, with the law of tithes serving as the source law, and the law of firstborn animals inferred from it, since it is the tithe laws here which are halakhic given, since they are indeed a land-dependent obligation, mitzvah atluya ba'aretz, in contrast to the laws of firstborn animals. And indeed, this is the direction of the inference in the Talmudic source for Maimonides' ruling in Tractate Torah 21b. Second, Maimonides' inference in the end of 5, therefore separating second tithe is not required in Syria, seems to make no sense. For how does this inference follow from the first part of his statement about second tithe being comparable to a firstborn? Reb Chaim's proposed solution to these difficulties appears in number 6 on the handout, to wit, even though second tithe is a land-dependent commandment, and as such, there is no such thing. It's non-existent by definition outside the land of Israel. Reb Chaim explains that there is a second reason why this precept does not apply in the diaspora. The inference from the law of the firstborn to the law of second tithe. In other words, there are two inferences taking place here simultaneously in opposite directions. Reb Chaim explicitly observes that this putative inference is counterpossible. I quote, "Even if we could find second tithe outside the land of Israel, the law would be that it is not subject to being brought from outside the land of Israel, like a firstborn. The counterpossible character of this argument is astonishing, and Reb Chaim addresses this difficulty explicitly, and I quote again, "How can we draw inferences to second tithe in this way from the case of a firstborn, since in fact there is no such thing whatsoever as second tithe outside the land of Israel, by definition? So how can we infer to something which does not exist?" Reb Chaim's answer, in a nutshell, is that we are dealing with an inference based on biblical analogy, Hekesh, and since the source law of the firstborn attributes a certain legal status to that entity, to wit, inapplicability in the diaspora, this status is automatically transferred to the target case of second tithe, even though this is logically and halachically counterpossible. Now, the basis of this inference, as indicated, is formalistic, the Hekesh. But the substance of the inference entails attributing a status to an object which is in fact incapable of assuming such a status, namely, treating second tithe outside the land of Israel as if it were somehow existent, that it could assume the diasporan exemption allegedly inferred from the law of firstborn animals. If I may offer an admittedly imperfect analogy, what Reb Chaim has done here is tantamount to asserting that if there were square circles, every point on the circumference of these objects would be equidistant from their center by virtue of the circularness of these impossible and non-existent entities. Thus, the counterpossible here is not just used for rhetorical or didactic purposes, but rather reflects a unique sort of formalistic halakhic metaphysics. We may now summarize. One of the techniques of legal analysis utilized by Reb Chaim, which is apparently without precedent in earlier halakhic literature, entails the consideration of counterpossible conditionals. Such statements are used in a variety of capacities, two of which I have illustrated here: rhetorical didactic and formalistic metaphysical. Both uses of counterpossibles reflect creativity and originality of the highest degree. And I might note, in parentheses, the discussion or the consideration of counterpossibles is a very 20th century, perhaps even earlier 20th century way of thinking. We find parallels to this in secular philosophy, for example, in the writings of the noted and controversial German philosopher Alexius Meinl, in art, in the drawings of Escher, in literature, in the writings, in the short stories of Jorge Luis Borges, in physics, in quantum physics, and most notably in Niels Bohr's interpretation of quantum physics, etc., etc., etc. In any case, Reb Chaim's use of counterpossibles reflects a unique and seemingly unprecedented form of non-realistic halakhic thought, whereby not just the abstract, but also the inconceivable and unimaginable play an essential role in halakhic analysis and interpretation. A more extensive treatment of this phenomenon remains a desideratum, but I'm afraid that I'll have to leave this for another occasion. As the Talmudic rabbis taught us, Lo alecha amlacha ligmor, the work is not yours to finish, but you are not free to desist from it. Thank you very much.